Hi, Gabby. It's
Hi.
good to see you this morning, and I'm thankful that you've taken the time to share your story with us today. I've loved watching your story because not only are you an immigrant to the United States, but you have a really unique family, and especially in this time when we're looking at all of the demonstrations and the conversations and the interest in understanding what it means to be a person of color. I think you have a very incredible perspective that we need to hear about. So why don't you start out our time together by sharing a little bit of your background story of how you came to the U.S. and we'll see how our conversation goes today.
Yeah, well, and thank you for having me, inviting me. It's really an honor to be able to talk to you and share a little bit. So, like you said, my story is it's different than many people, probably similar to others, but I came from privilege. I didn't come here as many people do out of desperation or seeking a new life or Um, I don't know what the pain of crossing a border in the dark is. I don't know what it's like to have your family separated. I'm very aware that other people have that experience. Mine was different. My mom worked for UNICEF, and she actually got a Fulbright scholarship to come to the US and get a master's in public health. And so she chose the University of Kansas Medical Center because they gave her the full ride. I was 16, an only child. My parents were divorced, so I had to come with her. The plan was to only be
Where
here.
were you? Where were
I'm
you?
sorry?
Where were you coming
Oh,
from?
I'm sorry. We're coming from Ecuador. So I
Okay.
was born and raised in Quito, Ecuador. And so when I was 16, my mom came, dragged me, kicking and screaming. I didn't want to come. You know, I had my life in Ecuador, my friends, all of that. So the plan was to come for only 2 years and then go back home. But in the story of how we ended up staying, it's much bigger. It was a God thing. Lots of things happened. But the interesting part about my story is that even though I came um, documented, the whole process wasn't easy anyway. So my mom came a month before I did, and I traveled by myself from Quito to Houston, and I didn't speak any English whatsoever. I had grown up speaking Spanish and French, but I didn't really know any English. I mean, I could maybe say, how are you, and something like that. And 25 years ago when I came, when you moved from the international part of the Houston airport to the domestic part, nobody spoke Spanish. I couldn't find a single person to speak to me. Nobody did. And so I was going through immigration and I could see people getting their stamps, moving on, moving on. And when it came to me, they took me to a room in the back of the airport. And they sat me down and there was a woman in the front, but I still couldn't understand what was happening because, again, I didn't speak Spanish, English. And so the woman called me up, and my legal name is Denise, but I don't go by Denise, I go by Gabby. So I'm sitting there, I don't know what's going on. And she starts to call Denise, Denise. And it took me probably a good 5 minutes. I'm like, to realize it was me. So I went up to her and she said something to me and then crossed out my visa and gave me my passport back to me and sent me on my way. And it wasn't until I got to Kansas and we figured this out that we realized my mom had a J1 visa and I was supposed to come as a J2, but they made a mistake in the embassy in Ecuador and gave me a J1 visa. So at the airport, they figured this out, they crossed it out and gave me my passport back. But here's the thing that as an adult now, I think it's outrageous. I was 16, so I was a minor. I didn't speak English. And nobody called my mom. Nobody got me a translator. Nobody did anything. So she gave me my passport back and I panicked. Like I didn't think they were gonna let me through. And so I think back on that now and I think this is crazy.
Right.
This 16-year-old non-English speaker should have had a translator, should have had some adult walking with me through that process, right? So I got here and it was fine. I moved on, graduated from high school, married my husband, and then we started the process of me becoming a U.S. citizen. So first you have to get a green card, right? So they sent me a green card, and the first green card they sent me said I was from Colombia. So I had to send it back. And that time I sent it back and they did the process again. So they sent it again and the post office lost it. And by the time we figured out what had happened, the time had passed. So I had to reapply and pay again out of my own money for another green card. So, I think a lot about people who say, oh, why don't they just come here through the legal channels or whatever? And I have to tell you, the legal channels are not easy either. They are complicated, they are expensive. Whenever you have to go to the immigration offices, they often treat you like, second-class citizen. So anyway, I think it's interesting that I came here through all the documented channels, all the legal ways, and it still was a very difficult and frustrating process.
Well, and you touched on a couple of things. Number one being just the linguistic challenges that come with not speaking the language of the country that you're going to. And I don't claim to identify fully with that because of my English background as a US citizen, but having traveled to other countries where the other receiving party doesn't speak my language,
right,
it can lead to extremely anxious and frustrating experiences. But then you touched on something else about coming from a background of privilege and having access to the resources to pay the fees and to, I don't know if you used an attorney or not in filing your documentation, but here you are now all these years later and your immigration status has changed. Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit about how you have, where you came in your career and with your family and how things look today for you.
I'm not sure exactly what you mean.
So, I mean, you eventually married a U.S. citizen. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about your family background currently.
The family I have now?
Right.
Okay, I was going to mention, I didn't have to use an attorney because my case was pretty easy, but my mom did because she was divorced. And so that was a whole nother layer of having to. So I met Matt, who is South Carolina native and, white American guy here in the U.S. And we married when I was in college and he was in graduate school. And we adopted 2 Black children. So my family is transracial and bilingual because my kids also speak Spanish. And I mean, we're all U.S. citizens at this point. I'm trying to get my children dual citizenship with Ecuador, just in case they ever want to go back and live there. But
so, as a transracial family, as you describe yourselves, we're in really unique times because you have one foot in your immigration experience, mm-hmm. and as a Latina and as a person of color, and then your children being born as U.S. citizens, but they're Black, and you live in a part of the country where there's a lot of history with racial issues. What are some of the things that you are experiencing even now as you're observing and as you're living in these days?
Well, we lived in South Carolina for 15 years, and now we are in West Virginia. And it's been a little different. West Virginia, I guess South Carolina is very much embedded in the South. So our experiences, probably the most, no, that's not really true. I've had experiences here too. So are you asking specifically like experiences as a person of color here?
Sure. Describe what that's like, because I also have a child who is Mexican by birth. Mm-hmm. And so I'm experiencing things in how people observe and interact with us as a family, as a biracial family, in ways that I would have never anticipated had I not adopted our wonderful, beautiful child. And so what are some of the things that you experience in these interesting times as a family that's transracial?
I mean, probably, your run-of-the-mill racism first. Looks. I don't know that I think we try to protect our children from comments and things. So I think my children probably wouldn't, I don't know that they would say that they've experienced racism yet. we've been very protective of who they interact with, you know, where they are and where they go. I know I have myself as a person of color. I'm your run of the mill being followed at a store, being comments made that are ignorant. I don't know, the need to educate everyone. Everyone feels like you are the expert on everything going on right now, or things that, you know, anything Latino, anything immigration. Um,
So in that regard, tell us a little bit about your background professionally, because that shapes really your ability to navigate your family and navigate your own, like how you interact with people that you don't know and in public places and with friends even.
right.
So what's your background and what you're doing right now?
You mean my professional? It's like, so I'm an educator. I've been an educator all my life since I college. That's what I do. That's my passion. That's what I love to do. So I feel like everything I do goes back to education, you know, formally and informally. I can't be quiet. I have to talk to people, but it gets exhausting at times. You know, there's times that people want to talk, and especially people who feel like they get it, right? White people who feel like they get it, they want to talk to someone and tell them how they get it. And so you tend to, I just recently I had a conversation with a couple of friends, and I really didn't want to talk about this right now. I was kind of exhausted, but they just kept wanting to tell me how much they've been reading and how much they've been understanding. And so, but education is my passion, and I feel like being an immigrant has made me a better teacher in every way, because it has opened up my world, my perspective. I have a different understanding of where people come from, the compassion and empathy, you know, just being someone who has lived in other places, who I think is just has made me a better rounded educator in every way.
Well, I've followed you on social media, and you have written some pieces that come from your heart that explain some of the challenges that you've experienced in interacting with friends and interacting with strangers. And as an educator in these times, what do you see as being components of, maybe we can focus specifically on people in the church world. What
Mm-hmm.
are some pieces, whether it's lay people or pastors, that you feel would be education components that should be required at these points?
Cultural competence, um, the the ability to learn and listen from people who have had different experiences is one. I feel like I wrote something about that today. I feel like people have the need to give their opinion. They need to express their thoughts on something that they're not familiar with. And and I guess I'm particularly thinking about white pastors and white lay people. Um, so the idea that you listen to people of color, you ask questions, you pay attention and learn first. I've been disappointed a little with the way that our local church here has responded to what's been going on. I feel like pastors are afraid to speak up from the pulpit, to say anything that might rock the boat. Um, I think they need education on what it means to be anti-racist, not just against racism. Um, I don't think our churches do a good job teaching their people that, right? There's lots of curriculum out there that you can use in a small group. I feel like we tiptoe around things like that, and we can't as a church.
Why do you think that is? Why is it that especially white pastors are intimidated in these times?
Well, I mean, you've been a pastor. You are a pastor. You know um, why pastors don't want to say something. They're afraid that people will be angry. They're afraid people will leave. They're afraid of their responses. And if they've not been trained on how to speak about these things, then they don't know where to start, right? They don't know what to say. And I've been encouraged because I've seen more and more, like the Nazarene Seminary just recently put out some resources for pastors. So to put some things in pastors' hands that allow them to know how to shape these conversations, because it's scary to delve into something that you don't understand or you don't know anything about.
It's rewarding in in my line of work as an advocate for immigration and people who find themselves to be in vulnerable positions in life. Through the work of the Evangelical Immigration Table, there's one of our critical members of the table is the CCCU, the Coalition of Christian Colleges and Universities, and we have an interesting dialogue that's happening amongst university presidents and other advocates for these very issues. And I'm very, very thankful to see that on a much broader perspective, that some steps are being taken. So I have to look back at my own self as a pastor of a local church and ask myself, what am I doing to not only learn, and I've probably been that white friend at times who's come to you to say, hey, guess what, I'm learning. And kind of, you're looking for that stamp of approval from somebody to say, good job, you're taking good steps. But you're right, it is exhausting to be in a place where you're trying to help people catch up with reality.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, I find more and more that there are people that have good hearts, mm-hmm. but they're just filled with a lot of misconceptions of themselves or of even people of color, especially immigrants, I think. And I don't know. I have a question there. I just don't know how to ask that. But what are some of the things that you've helped with these friends who've come along the way? How do you help people through misconceptions that they have with grace? Because it's just to tell people, you're stupid, you're ignorant.
Right.
It's not a really effective communication tool.
I think that's definitely been a balance that I've had to find as a Christian too. Because I want to be bold enough and not coddling of my friend's fragility, right? But at the same time, I don't want to lose my audience by being too radical and too, I don't know what the word is, too militant maybe. I have lots of thoughts and opinions, but I try to moderate them to reach that person who is just dipping a toe into this. It's like the deer, right? You don't want to scare them. You want to go slowly. And to be honest with you, there are people who think that that's not the right way to do it. That you should confront it, face on, and be very non-compromising about it. But I over the years that I've been here, I feel like I have a lot of people who have slowly turned corners because of conversations that we've had. So I try to be very careful. I tell stories. I don't like to share people's logical arguments. I don't like that. I tell a lot of stories because I feel like personal narrative is more powerful than any sort of debate that you can have. So I tell my stories, and I tell stories of my children, and I tell stories of friends that allow me to tell their stories. And I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who was military wife, and telling her that I'm beginning to have conversations with Noah, my son, about how to deal with police. If you get pulled over, he's still only 12, but we begin to have those conversations. Even like if you go to the store, don't put your hands in your pockets, keep your hands where they can be seen, those kinds of conversations. And I remember her saying, I never thought about that. She has a son a little bit older than Noah, and she's white. That I'd never worried about where Mason's hands would be when he's in the store. And she's become over the years more and more bolder, I guess. She's become bolder about the things that she shares on social media, the conversations she's having. And I can't help but think that she's just calm, slowly. Doesn't make sense, like baby steps.
Right.
Baby steps are good.
Yeah, they are. And, it's, at least with my personality type, it's the patience of helping people take those baby steps and hoping that they will in turn help others take their baby steps. So in that line of thinking, you are a very gifted communicator. You're a strong professional presence in this world of writing and sharing thoughts. And like, I love how you said you love sharing other people's stories
Mm-hmm.
and the power of story. What would you say, as we're thinking in line of um, these times that are impacting the lives of immigrants? We are in a political climate where the changes have been so drastic and actually causing a lot of anxiety amongst those who are either don't have immigration status or their status is in question. I guess my question would be, like, as a communicator, how do you, where do you see hope? How do you find hope in the midst of these kinds of times? How do you convey that to people that are in those kind of vulnerable positions?
That's a good question. And I have to say, my first source of hope, of course, is Jesus Christ, because as a believer, that's where I find my hope. But I think hope for me looks like people who begin to get it, people who begin to advocate, people who begin to walk alongside, people that have the power to make changes and that begin to walk alongside us and get and begin to understand. But also in each other, right? I mean, uh, in people that have been through your experience and understand what it's like. I find a lot of hope in my students who then go on to become linguists and immigrant advocates. You know, the next generation of people. I really feel that things are changing, and maybe I'm just an optimist, but I've seen change over the last few months, maybe a year. People are beginning to see things differently, and I don't know. I don't know if the undocumented, documented immigrant thing is. I think that has a little bit further to go than just the racism issue that we're seeing. But I think that people are beginning to understand.
So as a writer, if you could sit down and just write about what you're most passionate about, what would you write about?
Probably racial reconciliation. I think is my big one. Because even though I'm an immigrant, the the most unique thing about our family is that we have three different races represented, right? And so I think that's probably where my passion. And if you read what I write, it's mostly about racial reconciliation and how our Christianity, our love for God, fits in that particular.
And how can people find what you write? How can
Oh
they?
boy. I'm on Facebook. I usually public my writing and I leave it public so anybody can read that.
Right.
And so far, I will say I've been blessed with not a whole lot of like conflict about the things I write. I think it's because most of the people who read know me personally and they know my heart. You know, I think about those big figures that have all those people that just are ugly.
Yeah.
I haven't had that happen to me, but
Do you have a book in the future?
that I'm reading or that I'm writing.
Writing.
Oh boy, actually I do. I've been thinking a lot about that because of my experience coming from a privileged position. So in Ecuador, where I'm from, I'm not considered a person of color. I don't know if this is a concept that a lot of my white friends think like it blows their mind. Because I come from privilege, when I was being raised in Ecuador, I was considered the privileged majority, right? Like white people would be here. And I wasn't a person of color. I was just a person, right? And it wasn't until I came to the US that I became a person of color because I was other than the white community. And so I feel like I have my foot on both understandings, right? I understand what it's like to be blind to your own privilege and to your own biases because in Ecuador we would have those biases against Black Ecuadorians and indigenous people, right? Here I'm on the other side of that foot, and so I've been thinking a lot about that, and I think that's where the book is going to come from.
Interesting. Well, I can't wait to read it.
Oh
And
boy.
I love I love following the stories of your kids, especially. You have brilliant, talented, funny, and probably pretty normal and frustrating kids at times as well. And thank you so much for taking time to share a little bit of your story. I look forward to sharing it with others, and look forward to growing closer to Jesus with you and your family.
Thank you.
So, anything else you want to say as we wrap up today?
No, I can't think of anything, but if you have any other questions, you let me know.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabby.